Heidelberg Castle stood silently under the night sky, its weathered stone walls covered in creeping moss, like scars left behind by time. A damp chill filled the air, and dust swirled in the dim candlelight. I stood in the center of the gallery, staring at the ancient wedding portrait before me. The painting was warm in tone, bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. The banquet table was laid out in grand fashion, guests smiling as they celebrated. In the center of it all stood Otto von Eichen, the groom, his posture straight and dignified. Everything seemed harmonious, except for the bride beside him. Katharina. She should have been happy. Her gown was exquisite, layers of white lace flowing around her like a delicate mist. And yet, there was no joy on her face, only fear. Her eyes were wide, almost unnaturally so, as if she were staring into something no one else could see. Something that consumed her. A chill crept up my spine. I had seen this painting before, yet I had never noticed the sheer terror in her expression. And stranger still, I knew for a fact that this painting had been extensively documented and studied over the years. But in all those records, no one had ever mentioned the single tear at the corner of her eye. I didn't remember it being there. But now, unmistakably, it was. A perfect, glistening droplet, as though it had only just fallen, still fresh, still wet. I reached out, hesitant, wanting to confirm whether it was merely a crack in the paint, a trick of aging. But the moment my finger brushed the canvas, a bone-deep chill surged through me, freezing my breath and my lungs. I recoiled instantly, my heart hammering against my ribs. And then, I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible sound. Someone was crying. I spun around. The room was empty. The doors remained shut. The windows, thick with dust, had not been touched by wind in decades. Holding my breath, I listened again. The sobbing was faint, distant, like someone trying to hold it in, trapped in some dark and forgotten corner of the room. It was quiet, yet heavy with despair. Slowly, my eyes returned to the painting. My blood ran cold. In the flickering candlelight, the tear at the corner of the bride's eye had grown deeper. The next day, I could hardly wait to get to the Heidelberg University archives, hoping to uncover more about the painting. I sifted through thick rolls of parchment, the yellow pages exuding a faint, musty scent of decay. There wasn't much recorded about Katharina. Most entries focused on her noble lineage, the political nature of her marriage, and the strange, whispered rumors surrounding her disappearance on the night of her wedding. She was never found. No body, no clues. It was as if she had never existed, swallowed whole by time itself. The archivist handed me a long-forgotten document, saying it had been discovered years ago in a hidden chamber within the castle. It was thin, unremarkable, except for the fragile, leather-bound diary tucked inside. The cover was cracked, the pages brittle, yet the ink remained strikingly clear. The moment I flipped open the first page, I knew this diary had belonged to Katharina. She had written about her life leading up to the wedding, her words brimming with excitement and anticipation for the future. At first, her handwriting was fluid, light-hearted, full of a young woman's innocent joy. But as I read on, her script grew uneven, erratic. In some places, the ink was pressed so hard into the paper that it had torn straight through. And then I saw the words that made my skin crawl.
Otto has changed. He wakes in the middle of the night and stands by the window, whispering to himself. When I ask who he's speaking to, he only smiles. I dreamed of the castle cellar. It was pitch black. I could hear voices, wet, broken voices, like they were speaking from underwater. I don't think I was supposed to hear them.
My fingers trembled slightly as I turned to the final entry. There was only one sentence. The handwriting was frantic, jagged, like someone had scrawled it down in terror.
I hear him calling me from downstairs, but he's already dead.
For a moment, the air in the archive felt heavy, suffocating. My breath slowed. Otto hadn't died on the night of the wedding. He had lived for at least several months after. But if what the diary said was true, then who had been calling for her that night? Or rather, what? I snapped the diary shut, my pulse pounding in my ears. I had to go back to the painting. I had to confirm what I had seen. I needed to know what Katerina had looked upon that made her so utterly terrified. That night, candlelight flickered once more in the Heidelberg Castle gallery. Carefully, I raised a UV lamp to the painting, searching for hidden brushstrokes. At first, I saw nothing unusual. But then, the moment the light passed over the bride's eyes, I sucked in a sharp breath. Beneath the layers of paint, something was there. Another face. A blurred outline, hollow eyes, a twisted mouth. It stood just behind the bride, watching her. Watching me. And in that instant, I heard it again. Crying. But this time, it wasn't distant. It wasn't coming from some far-off corner of the castle. This time, it was right next to me. Night had fallen over Heidelberg Castle, shrouding it in a heavy, oppressive gloom. The sky was so dark it felt as though the earth itself had been swallowed whole by the shadows. The candle in my hand flickered weakly, barely pushing back the deep, bone-chilling cold that clung to the ancient walls. And then, the crying returned. It was no longer a distant, ghostly wail from some unseen place. This time, it was close, too close. Soft, shuddering sobs curled around my ears, as if a woman were standing just behind me, weeping into the darkness. I didn't dare turn around. The air in the gallery was suffocating, thick with something unseen. The wooden floor beneath me gleamed faintly in the candlelight. And then, I noticed it. The floorboards were wet. Dark stains seeped across the aged wood, winding and spreading as if something or someone had walked through, drenched in water. My gaze followed the trail, leading toward the doorway. The watermarks stretched into the corridor, vanishing into the shadows beyond. It looked as if something had stepped out of the painting. A sharp pulse of dread struck my chest. I knew I should stop. I knew. But the sobbing called to me, luring me forward like a whisper from the abyss, gnawing away at my reason. Clutching the candlestick tightly, I followed the damp footprints, my steps echoing against the stone floors. It felt as though something ancient was stirring, awakened by my presence. The crying grew louder. Lower. More anguished, like a soul abandoned in endless darkness. Ahead, a door came into view. It was shut tight, coated in a thick layer of dust, yet the handle was eerily clean, untouched by time. As if someone had grasped it recently. I swallowed hard, my breath shallow. Slowly, I reached out and pressed my palm against the wood. The door groaned open with a long, heavy sigh. A wave of cold air rushed past me. The floor inside was damp, covered in the same water stains. The scent of decay filled the room, a mix of mold, rot, and something older, something that didn't belong. My candle cast twisting shadows along the walls as I stepped inside. Then I saw it. A mirror. It stood in the corner, its glass fogged over, as though someone had been standing before it, breathing against the surface. My pulse quickened. I moved closer, my fingertips ice cold, the numbness spreading through my hands. And then, through the mist, a figure began to take shape. A woman. She wore a soaked, white wedding gown. Her black hair clung to her pale cheeks, her hollow eyes locked onto mine. Her lips trembled as if trying to speak, but no sound came out. She was speaking. There was no voice, no whisper, only the movement of her lips. And I understood every word.
Don't listen to him.
Before I could react, an invisible force slammed into me, hurling me backward. The door snapped shut with a deafening bang. The room plunged into suffocating silence. And then, a voice. Low. Slow. Crawling out from the cracks of time itself.
Katerina, come to me.
That voice came from the far side of the room. A shadow slowly emerged from the darkness. I couldn't make out its form. Blackness seemed to consume its edges, swallowing any defining features. It stood there, rigid and motionless, as if waiting for a response. The temperature plummeted. A deep, icy chill crawled up my spine, my heartbeat pounding so violently it felt like my ribs might crack under the pressure. The figure had no face, or maybe I simply couldn't focus on it. Every time I tried to look directly at its features, they twisted, dissolving into an abyss of deeper blackness. I instinctively stepped back. My fingers dug into the wooden floor for stability, only to find it soaked through with water. The floor was drenched. And then, the crying returned. This time, it wasn't distant. It was coming from the mirror. I whipped around. She was still there. The woman in the soaked wedding gown. Tears streamed down her pale cheeks, her lips trembling, still trying to warn me. But I had no time left to decipher her message. The shadow lurched toward me. The walls shuddered violently, the entire room quaking as if reality itself were about to collapse. I scrambled backward, desperate to get to my feet, to run, but the darkness was pulling at me, swallowing the space around me, stretching, warping, as if it was unraveling the very fabric of the room. And in that suffocating void, the whispers began. Not one voice, many. Layered, distorted, slithering into my ears, murmuring secrets that should never be spoken.
She can't leave. She belongs here. She belongs to me.
The air thickened, pressing into my lungs like wet cement. Every breath felt like drowning. This thing, it wasn't just a ghost. It was something else. A curse. A presence that had existed in the folds of time itself. I clawed my way toward the door, but the floor turned to sludge beneath me, dragging me down, pulling me into the darkness. And then, the mirror shattered. A deafening explosion of glass. Splinters flew through the air, and in the fractured shards, I saw her, the bride, splintering into nothingness. Her form twisted, distorted, dissolving into the void. The weight holding me down suddenly lifted. With the last of my strength, I lunged for the doorway, stumbling out into the corridor, collapsing onto the cold stone floor. Behind me, the shadow lingered. It didn't follow. It couldn't. It was trapped there, in its domain, waiting for the next unfortunate soul to step inside. I didn't wait. I ran until I reached the gallery, my breath ragged, my hands shaking. Outside, the night was still. Heidelberg Castle stood in silence, dark and unmoving, as if nothing had happened. I turned to the painting. The tear on the bride's face was gone, and her expression, no longer frozen in terror, seemed at peace, as if she had finally been set free. But I knew this wasn't over. As I packed my things to leave, I heard it. A whisper. So faint, I almost thought I imagined it.
Thank you, but he is still here.
I didn't turn back.